G'day folks, thanks for checking out this video. The first in a series on an instrument which is, well, as Australian as a hat with corks on it, the amazing Lagerphone. Even in its many unique forms, or maybe because of them, the Lagerphone is a very distinctive instrument. It has become synonymous with Australian traditional folk music and the Aussie bush band sound. In this first video, we're going to take a bit of a dive into the Lagerphone's history and its introduction into Australian folk music. We hope you find it interesting and enjoyable. It is generally believed that the original ancestor to the Lagerphone was the Turkish crescent, used by military bands in the 18th century or even earlier. It was picked up by many other countries as well, notably the British military bands in the early 19th century, where it was known as the Jingling Johnny. We only have oral accounts as to when the earliest Lagerphone appeared in Australia. Notes from Bob Bolton of the Bush Music Club tell of an ex-bushman who claims to have come across one as early as 1912. This was not very long after the crown cork seals were first introduced into Australia in 1902. As Bob notes, Australian ingenuity must have got to work with the idea pretty quickly. Okay, so we can see where the inspiration for the Lagerphone may well have come from, but we don't know exactly when it appeared in Australia. But we do know for certain when it was first introduced into the Australian folk tradition. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this one about the bloke who started it all. John Meredith was a pioneer collector of Australian folk music and song, whose work greatly influenced the Australian folk music revival of the 1950s. Born in Holbrook, New South Wales, he developed an interest in Australian bush songs when he bought a copy of Banjo Patterson's Old Bush Songs. In his late 20s, he began to seek out traditional Australian songs to include in the repertoire of the People's Choir, of which he was a member. In 1952, he was introduced to Jack Lee, an old man known as Hoobairn. Hoobairn knew many of the old bush songs Meredith had been trying to find, and John started to record them. He soon discovered that he had uncovered an entire network of old singers and musicians who knew material that was assumed to have been lost from the Australian culture. Meredith's long career as a folklore collector began, and he spent every available weekend travelling throughout New South Wales, collecting songs and dance tunes from some of Australia's finest traditional singers. In 1952, Meredith formed the first Australian revivalist bush band with Jack Barry and Brian Lachlan. Originally known as the Heathcote Bushwhackers, they were later simply known as the Bushwhackers. Meredith had begun to collect and record bush music and songs, and the band aimed to perform this new repertoire to promote the folk music traditions of rural Australia. So, how did the Lagerphone find its way into Australian folk music? Well, to tell you that, I'm going to use words from John Meredith himself from his memoir, which he wrote in January 1997. And this is a small section called The Old Rabbiter's Gift. In this day and age, no self-respecting bush band would be seen or heard without its Lagerphone. But it was not always thus. 45 years ago, the now ubiquitous noisemaker was unknown. In fact, before 1952, there wasn't even a bush band. That was the year when I had a brilliant idea. I played the old traditional bush instrument called the button accordion, and my brainwave was to con a couple of my mates, Brian and Jack, into joining me to form a group which would sing old bush songs to the accompaniment of the squeeze box, as it was affectionately called. Then Brian and I went on a visit to my family in my hometown of Holbrook. "Come up to my place tonight," said my brother Claude. "I've got a surprise for you. Bring your squeeze box." In due course we arrived, and I was ordered to play. "Give us something lively," ordered my big brother, going into the adjoining room. I swung into Click Go the Shears with Brian singing. Then there came this crashing, jingling, rhythmic sound as Claude marched in, bouncing a strange-looking instrument. It consisted of a bald-headed hair broom. They were made entirely of wood in those pre-plastic years, covered with loosely nailed-on bottle tops, which covered the head and most of the handle. As Claude bounced it along the floor to the downbeat, he alternatively struck and sawed at the handle with a serrated waddy. Then he proudly pronounced these portentous words. Introducing the one and only celebrated Lagerphone. Excitedly, we wrested it away from him, or rather, Brian did. My hands were strapped to the squeeze box. After a couple of tunes, we paused for another beer, and the obvious question, where in the hell did you get that from? And he told us the story. The local branch of the Red Cross Society had organised a fundraising amateur hour concert, open to all performers with prizes for various categories. An old rabbit poisoner had turned up. He came from about 10 miles out, where there was a little village called Lankeys Creek, and brought to the concert this as yet unnamed percussion instrument, which he played to a piano accompaniment, and scored a prize in the novelty section. Well, he was certainly novel, and Brother Claude could hardly wait to get home and make one for himself. He coined the name Lagerphone, because the words KB Lager appeared on the instrument several hundred times. This photo shows John playing the original Lagerphone that Claude had made. And this Lagerphone now rests on display in the Woolpack Museum in Holbrook. The Bushwhackers first performed with the Lagerphone at a house concert at Jack Barry's home in Heathcote, Sydney. They made such a strong impression that they were immediately booked to perform at a Tribune concert in Hurstville's Rivoli Theatre. And that concert was held on Friday the 30th of October 1953. Well, there you go. A quick overview into the Lagerphone's ancestry and a look at the people and events that led to it becoming a part of the Australian folk tradition. In the next video, we're going to be looking at Lagerphone components and how to go about starting to make one for yourself. Hope to see you then.